The betrayal that cost me my savings, how I took action against my own father. It all started with a phone call. I never expected that a simple, "Hey, how's everything going?" would set everything in motion, but here we are. My name's Ethan, and I'm 28. For as long as I can remember, I've been the one trying to do things the right way. I've spent the last few years saving every penny I can, determined to buy my first home. After all, it's not like I had a safety net growing up. My dad, Charles, was always the one who'd spend money like it was nothing. I watched him juggle bills, rack up debt, and then somehow talk his way out of every consequence. And yet, despite all of that, I trusted him. Or at least, I thought I did. So, when I saw his name light up on my phone one afternoon, I figured it was just another one of those calls to check in. The kind where he'd casually ask how work was going and mention something random about his life. But this time, there was a shift in his voice, a slight hesitation, like he was preparing to ask me for something. "Hey, Ethan. How's work? Still working towards that house, huh?" He sounded almost cheerful, which frankly was rare. My dad wasn't exactly known for asking about my life in such a way. It felt nice for a second, like maybe he was genuinely interested. Maybe he actually wanted to hear about my progress for once. Then came the change in tone. "Listen, bud, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But I'm in a bit of a tight spot right now and I need some help. Nothing serious, just some unexpected expenses." He paused. "I just need a loan. Just short term. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." It hit me like a punch to the gut. A tight spot? Wasn't that his go-to excuse every time? I knew better than to jump into it without questioning, but there was something about the way he said it this time, almost embarrassed, like it took everything in him to even ask. And that's what got me. He wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for my help. "How much are we talking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About $15,000, he said, almost apologetic. "But if that's too much, even half would really help." $15,000. It was a lot of money. More than I'd ever lent anyone, especially my dad. But then again, it was him. He was my father. And I wanted to believe him, wanted to think that, for once, he wasn't going to ask for something and not pay it back. "I'm doing this because I believe in you," I said, without really thinking. "Please don't make me regret it." He promised he wouldn't. That's what he always said. At that moment, I didn't know it, but I was already being pulled into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The warning signs were there, but I was too trusting, too eager to help. I'd regret it later, but I didn't know that yet. The next few days felt strangely off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I'd made a decision I'd come to regret. But then the phone rang again. It was my dad. "Charles?" "Hey, Ethan, it's me," he said, sounding a little less cheerful this time. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the kind of hesitation that made my heart drop before he even said anything. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" I tried to keep my voice casual, but even I could hear the tension in it. There was something different about this call. Something I couldn't quite place. "Listen, son, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but I'm in a real bind here," he started. His words were measured, slow, like he was carefully choosing each one. It's Tara's medical bills. She's been going through some health stuff, nothing too serious, but it's adding up. And then there's some repairs we need to take care of at the house. Plumbing issues, leaks, the works. Tara, his new wife. The woman who'd come into our family and turned everything upside down. I had never fully trusted her, and I was starting to wonder if my gut feelings were right. But I pushed that aside, trying to focus on what he was saying. "I get it, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But you're telling me you need a loan? How much are we talking?" There was a long pause. Too long. And when he finally spoke, it was almost like he was bracing himself for the answer. $15,000, Ethan. "I know it's a lot, but it's just for the short term, I swear. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. You know I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice." $15,000. The words echoed in my mind. That was no small amount. I had worked for years to save that money. It wasn't like I was rich, I wasn't swimming in cash, but it represented something important. My independence. My future. And yet, the hesitation gnawed at me. I wasn't sure why I couldn't just say no. My gut was telling me to run, but my head was telling me that this was my dad, my father, who had always been there for me in his own strange way. He was asking for help. He promised me he'd pay it back, just like he always did when he needed something. "You know, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't really urgent," he repeated, his voice growing softer, more pleading. "Tara's really struggling, and I'm doing everything I can. I just need a little help to get through this. It's not like I can turn to anyone else." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. He sounded desperate, like he was at the end of his rope. I wanted to help. I wanted to believe that this time, things would be different. but that nagging feeling was still there. I took a breath. Okay, Dad. I'll do it. I'll send you the money. I said it without really thinking, my mind already calculating the logistics, already convincing myself that this was the right thing to do. But don't make me regret this. Thank you, son, he said, his voice softer now, filled with gratitude. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I can. You're doing the right thing. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. I knew something didn't feel right, but I couldn't ignore the one thing that kept running through my mind. He was my father. And once again, I found myself trusting him. Even though my instincts were screaming at me to be cautious. I didn't know it then, but I was about to learn just how wrong I was. I knew I was making the right choice. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. $15,000. It wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't everything I had either. I had more than enough to cover it, even if it meant taking a hit to my savings. My dad promised he'd pay me back, and deep down, I wanted to believe him. After all, this was about family, right? It wasn't about the money, it was about helping him when he needed it the most. I had worked hard for every dollar I had. Every penny I'd saved over the years had been carefully counted, planned for, and spent with purpose. This $20,000, 5000 more than he asked for, was supposed to be the foundation of my future. It was supposed to be the down payment on my first house. It was supposed to be the step that would get me out of the cycle my parents had been trapped in. But now I was handing it over. Not just to anyone, but to my father. It was supposed to be a loan, a temporary arrangement. My head kept telling me this was the right thing to do. I logged into my bank account and started the transfer. It was hard to believe I was actually doing it, but my fingers moved mechanically, typing in the numbers and hitting send before I could second-guess myself. $20,000. There it was gone. I stared at the confirmation screen, trying to wrap my mind around it. I didn't regret it, not yet. I was just doing what needed to be done. But there was a quiet unease creeping in, something I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. I should have felt relief, right? That's what I kept telling myself. I should have felt good about helping my father. But instead, I felt a strange knot in my stomach, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're doing the right thing, I whispered to myself, trying to convince myself. I'd made a decision, and now all I had to do was trust that it would all work out. But as the minutes passed and I stared at the confirmation screen, something didn't sit right. I'd sent the money. I'd done what I thought was right. But the nagging voice in the back of my head kept growing louder. What if he didn't pay me back? What if the story was a lie? I pushed the thoughts away. I had to. I couldn't second-guess myself now. My dad had asked for help. He'd been sincere. He promised. But as I hit the log-out button and closed my bank app, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I told myself to relax. After all, it was just a loan. A short-term loan. A temporary fix. But deep down, a small voice whispered that I might have just made the biggest mistake of my life. It wasn't even a week after I sent the money when I got the text. It was from my dad, Charles. The kind of casual message that seemed innocent at first glance. Hey, we're off to Bali for 2 weeks. Tara's over the moon about it. Don't worry about the house, everything's good. I blinked at the words. Bali? Bali? I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. My stomach sank, a wave of nausea rising in my chest. Wait. Bali? I ran the numbers in my head, trying to make sense of it. The plumbing issues, Tara's medical bills, that's what he'd said. That's why he needed the money. But now he was casually texting me about a 2-week vacation halfway around the world? A vacation I had no idea about? My fingers trembled as I opened Facebook. What I saw made my blood run cold. Tara. She was sitting in first class, grinning from ear to ear, holding a mimosa like it was the most natural thing in the world. In the background, a flight attendant was smiling, offering her another drink. The caption read, "Starting the dream vacation I've waited years for. Thank you, Fred." Fred. That was my dad's name. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. I couldn't breathe. I scrolled through the photos, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. There they were, Tara lounging in a luxury resort wearing a new designer purse. The captions continued, each one more infuriating than the last. When your husband spoils you because you deserve it. Spoils her? With my money? I couldn't process it. It didn't make sense. This wasn't supposed to be happening. I couldn't believe it. I kept scrolling, the bile rising in my throat. The pictures painted a perfect picture. First-class flights, a beachfront villa, fancy dinners. Everything I had worked for was now funding this lavish trip. My stomach churned. I slammed the phone down on the table and tried to breathe. It was like my body refused to believe what my mind already knew. I grabbed my phone again, my hands no longer shaking, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I needed answers. I called him. It rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I sent a text. Dad, where's the money? I thought you were fixing the house. What is this? Bali? No reply. I waited. Quickly, my heart racing. Hey, I'll call you later. Everything's fine, don't worry about the house. Tara's been wanting a vacation for a while, and she deserves it, you know. Deserves it? Deserves what? My money? The same money he'd begged me for under the guise of urgent repairs? I couldn't even fathom the audacity. I called again, this time more urgently. Ring, ring, ring. Nothing. I sent another message. You promised you would pay me back. Where's the money, Dad? Still no response. I was left there, staring at my phone, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. How could he do this? How could he lie to me like this, take my money and spend it on himself? How could I have been so stupid? I felt the anger and humiliation rising up inside me, threatening to spill over. But most of all, I felt betrayed. I had trusted him. I had believed him when he said he needed help. But now? Now, I wasn't sure I could ever trust him again. The silence from his end only deepened the sting. He wasn't answering because he couldn't, or maybe because he didn't care to. Either way, the truth was right in front of me. The man I had trusted had used me just like he'd done with everyone else in his life. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront him. The rage that had been building inside me since I saw those photos, since I realized what he'd done, was about to explode. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number again, my fingers shaking as I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then he picked up. Hey, Ethan, Charles answered, his voice casually dismissive, like everything was fine. Dad? I snapped, where's the money? You promised me it was for the house repairs and medical bills. But I'm looking at pictures of you and Tara living it up in Bali. How long were you planning this? There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him shifting, probably trying to come up with an excuse. I wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. Ethan, you're being ridiculous, he finally said, his tone defensive but oddly calm. The money went to the repairs, just like I said. The trip? That was just something Tara and I decided to do afterward. It's nothing. You're overreacting. My blood ran cold. His lies were so smooth, so practiced. I wasn't some fool anymore. No, Dad, I cut him off. I know the truth. I saw the booking confirmation. The flights to Bali were booked 2 days before you even asked me for the loan. Don't lie to me. I've got the receipts. There was a beat of silence, then another sigh on the other end. Ethan, you're really digging into this, huh? That's low even for you. Do you really want to accuse your own father of something like this? You know I would never do that to you. The audacity. He was turning this around on me, trying to gaslight me into feeling guilty for calling him out. Stop lying, Dad. I shouted, my voice shaking with fury. You've been lying to me my whole life, haven't you? You've done this before, haven't you? You've pulled this scam on everyone. And now you've used me too. He was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him trying to control his temper. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. Look, I didn't want to ask you for money. But you're my son, Ethan. You're supposed to help me out when I'm in need. I'm just trying to take care of Tara, and I thought you'd understand that. But you? You just keep making things more difficult. Difficult? My voice was rising with every word. You took advantage of me, Dad. You lied to my face, you manipulated me into giving you money, and now you're playing the victim. I didn't ask for any of this. All I did was try to trust you. And this is how you repay me. His voice became colder. Well, I guess if you're going to act like this, we don't need to talk anymore. I was speechless for a moment. Was he really saying this? Was he seriously cutting me off because I had called him out on his lies? You've been doing this for years, haven't you? Using people, taking money, and always pretending like nothing ever happened, I continued, my voice cracking. You've been using me, using Tara, and using everyone else to get what you want. Don't be ridiculous, he sneered. Everyone knows how this works. Family helps each other out. That's how it's always been. I was done. The anger I had been holding in finally reached its breaking point, and I knew there was nothing left to say. My father wasn't going to change. I wasn't going to get an apology. He didn't feel guilty, didn't feel anything but entitlement. You don't get it, I said, my voice steady now. You've burned every bridge with me. I'm done, Dad. I'm done with you. You don't get to use me anymore. The call ended with him saying something under his breath, but I didn't even hear it. I dropped the phone onto the table, my chest heaving as the realization settled in. I had just confronted my father, and I had lost him. For good. And as the weight of that hit me, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about the money. This was about a lifetime of lies, of manipulation, and of being used by the one person I should have been able to trust the most. I was done. The door had been closed and there was no going back. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't let him get away with it. Not this time. I called a lawyer and I started the process of taking my father to court. I'd never imagined it would come to this. Never thought I'd find myself sitting across from someone, preparing legal documents, in a battle with the man who was supposed to teach me right from wrong. But here I was. I had to do it. Not just for the $20,000, but for myself. For my dignity. For the life I'd worked so hard to build. The weeks leading up to the court hearing were a blur. I spent hours gathering everything. Texts, bank records, receipts, proof of the betrayal that had shattered my trust. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom, my heart heavy but resolute. Charles showed up, as expected, with Tara by his side. She was dressed in her usual designer clothes, a smile on her face that felt like salt in the wound. Charles looked disheveled, as though he hadn't even bothered to prepare, as if this was just another inconvenience, something that would blow over once he turned on his charm. But not this time. When my lawyer presented the evidence, everything laid out so clearly, so undeniably, Charles shifted in his seat. The smug look on his face started to falter, just a little. He couldn't lie his way out of this one. The judge ruled in my favor. The full $20,000 plus court fees would be reimbursed. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt like I had won. But the truth is, it felt hollow. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, there was only a deep ache in my chest, a realization that no amount of money would ever fix what had been broken. I had fought for justice and I had gotten it, but what I had lost in the process could never be regained. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was shining, but it felt distant, almost unreal. I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had lost. My father wasn't just a person to me. He was a symbol of trust, of family. And now that symbol was shattered. As the days passed, I couldn't bring myself to talk to him. I couldn't bear hearing his voice or seeing him post about their next vacation or some other grand gesture, as though nothing had happened. So I did what I had to do. I blocked his number. I unfriended him on social media. I cut ties completely. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. There were moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing. Was this the right way to handle it? But deep down, I knew. Some betrayals go deeper than money. Some wounds can't be healed with apologies or promises. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It wasn't the fight for the money. It was the realization that the man I had spent my entire life trying to understand, trying to forgive, was never going to change. He had manipulated me, taken advantage of me, and lied to my face. And that was something I could never forgive. I sat down one evening, staring at my phone, my hand hovering over the block button. The silence between us felt suffocating, but it was the only peace I had left. With one final, painful click, I closed that door. In the end, I realized that standing up for myself wasn't about getting the money back or winning the court case. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about saying, no more. I deserve better than this. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Some days I still think about him. I think about all the good times, the memories, the moments when I thought he was someone I could count on. But I don't regret my decision, because I've learned something powerful through all this, that I am worth more than the lies he told, and I deserve a future where I'm not weighed down by the mistakes of the past. As I move forward, I know I'll never forget what happened. I'll never forget the betrayal. But I also know that in choosing to walk away, I'm finally free.